Williamson. So we've considered 2 opening speeches, and as well 2 rebuttals for and against the question, does God exist? We now enter the 3rd segment of the formal debate. This is the time for the questioning and dialogue. So in this section of the debate, each debater will have 7 minutes in which they will question the other on their position. Now there may be some heated and lively exchange as they probe the assumptions, the logic, the consistency, the ramifications of each other's arguments. And we will begin with Dr. Craig questioning Dr. Willett. You have 7 minutes.
Well, let's go. Can you hear me? Is this on? Does it sound out? No. Testing. Check 1, 2, 3. Check 1, 2, 3. Testing. 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 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go to the 6 reasons that I presented for God's existence. The first was the contingency argument for why anything at all exists. Now, you responded to this by saying that to postulate necessary existence is to beg the question by surreptitiously positing God. Now, that struck me as odd, George, because the example I gave of necessary beings was that of mathematical objects. And certainly there are lots of Platonists who hold to the existence of necessarily existing mathematical objects who are not theists. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I would, but there's also lots of other thinkers who don't regard ideal objects as any kind of existence at all.
Right, but the point is that to suggest that there's a distinction between necessary existence and contingent existence is not itself then to assume that God exists. It could be mathematical objects.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. Well, now you also said in response to that what proof is there of an unembodied mind? Well, isn't this argument itself a piece of evidence for an unembodied mind? This argument is an argument for an unembodied mind. That is to say, what entities are philosophers aware of? What candidates are there for an object that could be immaterial, timeless, spaceless, changeless, and so forth? And as I think of what traditional metaphysical categories philosophers talk about, the only 2 candidates I could come up with would be abstract objects or minds. And obviously it can't be an abstract object because it has causal power, so it would be a mind. It seems to me this is an argument for a mind.
Well, let me point out, once again, you're attempting to explain the known by the unknown. And I think we'd actually have to have something a bit better than just throwing God in there as if that explains something.
All right, well, let's go on to the cosmological argument. Remember, this had 2 premises. Whatever begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist. Now, I presented philosophical as well as scientific evidence for that crucial second premise. You didn't respond to any of the philosophical arguments for a beginning, did you?
I don't think I did.
Okay. So let's talk then about the scientific evidence. You said that an absolute beginning can't be proved scientifically. Now, if the universe did begin at a singularity, as is posited in the Standard Model, John Barrow and Frank Tipler, who are physicists, say, at the singularity, space and time came into existence. Literally nothing existed before the singularity. So if the universe originated at such a singularity, we would truly have a creation ex nihilo. Now, are they wrong as physicists to say that?
Well, the point is they're physicists. Are they philosophers?
No, these are physicists. One's from Tulane, the other's University of Sussex, when they wrote this book.
Yeah, and I'm not convinced that when a physicist starts using philosophical concepts to describe what he knows of his own science, that's a particularly good translation.
Yes, I certainly agree with you on that. And the use of nothing in certain scientific popular works is often grossly misleading. In this case, however, a singularity forms a boundary to space and time, doesn't it? I mean, it's not just a place where the laws of physics break down. If it's real, it's a boundary point through which space and time are inextendable, isn't that right?
Well, the whole question is it real?
Yes, that's the question. So I was just dealing with your point that this is something that science can't speak to. It would seem to me that if we did have evidence for a singular beginning, we would have evidence of an absolute beginning, if it's real.
Well, yes, but the
All right.
question still is if it's real.
All right, so is it real? Now, you're aware, I'm sure, of various models like the famous no boundary proposal by Stephen Hawking, which doesn't feature an initial singularity, but nevertheless involves an absolute beginning of time. The South Pole in his model represents the moment before which nothing exists. So you don't even need a singularity to be real in order to have an absolute beginning in a scientific model, it seems, do you?
You know, I'm not familiar with Stephen Hawking's proposition.
Okay. All right, well, I think that's all I had on that argument. Let me go to the fine-tuning argument. You asked, why should design even belong on the list? If you excluded, George, a priori from the list, then you're not even admitting design into the pool of explanatory options. Isn't that begging the question in favor of atheism, then? Shouldn't design at least be on the table?
My suggestion was simply that design doesn't belong there because our only experience with design is not of universes. We've only seen one universe. We haven't seen a God creating a universe. Our experience of all design is of human beings doing this job. So I don't think we have any particularly good reason to think that that is even a candidate for an explanation of the universe.
Now, the reason I suggested was because physical necessity and chance are not viable explanations of the fine-tuning that we observe, whereas if there is a cosmic designer, that would make the fine-tuning very probable. Wouldn't you agree that the probability of fine-tuning on theism is much, much higher than the probability of fine-tuning on naturalism?
Exactly, and as I pointed out, all that says is that on the assumption of God, on the assumption there's a God that would want exactly the universe fine-tuned the way that we see it, then the probability is higher.
Yes,
but
and that is to say,
atheists can accept that, and it doesn't prove anything.
And isn't that to say? Isn't that just to say, therefore, that the scientific evidence confirms the existence of God? That is what it means to say that the probability of fine-tuning is higher on theism than naturalism. The evidence confirms the existence of the designer.
No, it's simply saying that if you make certain assumptions, probabilities go up and then they go down.
And I believe time is now up.